My stepmother made an unfortunate accusation against me when I was 21. This was a difficult time for my father, who ultimately decided to cut me off. 7 years later, he came to understand the truth. I was born into a family where my biological parents divorced when I was 9. They shared equal custody of me, and I spent weekdays with my mom, who lived near my school. Despite their separation, my mom lived near my school and I spent weekends with my dad. They were always kind and gentle towards me when I was sad that they were not together. I understood that they both loved me deeply. A few years later, my dad met Gina, who would become my stepmother, when I was 11. My dad introduced her to me, and she seemed nice. My dad was clearly happy that we would get along well. Gina had twin daughters, Emma and Emily, who were 14 at the time. As they grew up without their father, the twins were quite immature and would throw a tantrum if they didn't get their way. As an introvert, I quietly observed their behavior. After a year of dating, my dad and Gina decided to marry. Even my mom attended the wedding. I was excited to have a new family member. Initially, I thought my stepmother and I got along well. However, a few months after their honeymoon, she told me one morning that she didn't really. She said that we needed to pretend to get along for my dad's sake when he was around. She also told me to stay out of her way when he wasn't there, because she couldn't stand the sight of me. I reminded her of my mom, and hearing her harsh words broke my heart. I had genuinely liked her and hoped for a good relationship. The twins overheard her and later teased me, saying that my dad didn't love me and preferred them. I remember, after sharing my concerns with my mother, she promptly contacted my father to discuss the matter. My father reassured her that my stepmother's statements were not reflective of her true feelings, and that I may have misinterpreted her words. The following weekend, when I visited my father, my stepmother seemed distressed. She maintained silence in front of my father, but, as soon as he left, she expressed her anger to me in a whisper, threatening that she would ensure I no longer had a relationship with my father if I ever told my mother about her. She also warned that she would divorce my dad and take all his money, leaving him destitute. I was just 12 years old at the time and was terrified for my dad, so I nodded in agreement. From that day on, Gina made it her mission to make my life miserable in every way possible. As a child, I felt I had to endure it silently whenever we were alone. She would say hurtful things to me, and I would stay silent, hoping she would eventually stop bullying. She would also make comments about my height and weight, calling me ugly. I hoped my dad would notice, but he never did. He believed Gina and I had a good relationship and would often ask me to go shopping and eat out with her and the kids. She would use my dad's credit card to pay for our meals, but she wouldn't let me eat anything substantial at the restaurant. I was only allowed to have soup or dessert, not a main course. I would sit there feeling sad, watching them finish their meals, while crying. I would return home hungry, and she would force me to go to bed without eating. There were many nights I cried myself to sleep, both hungry and exhausted from her actions. I was at my wits' end, scared, angry, and frustrated with both my stepmom and my dad. This is why I dreaded visiting my dad on weekends. Every Friday evening, I would try to avoid visiting by coming up with excuses like a stomach ache so I could stay with my mom. My parents started noticing, and my dad would call expressing sadness at not seeing me. My mom would urge me to tell her if something was wrong, but I always kept quiet, still scared of Gina's threats. When I was 14, my dad decided to take the whole family, including me, on a trip to Greece. Initially, I didn't want to go, but my mother told me it was a good opportunity to travel and see the world, so I reluctantly agreed to join them. As usual, Gina pretended to be sweet. In front of my dad, she would ask about school as if she genuinely cared. I noticed that she would subtly tease me in her sweet voice, making hurtful comments that wouldn't outright portray her as mean. For example, whenever I mentioned playing basketball, she would joke that I needed to be taller for that sport. Even though I was quite tall for my age, she would then say I should focus more on studies if I ever wanted to be successful. The twins would smirk and call me names. Even though I had better grades than them, my dad would notice, but choose to ignore it whenever I expressed that her comments hurt me. My dad insisted she was just teasing and that I should lighten up. Gina would nod and tell my dad that I had no sense of humor and needed to learn to have fun. This continued throughout the vacation. One day, in a moment of anger when she and the twins were teasing me about my weight while I was trying to enjoy the pool, I decided to respond in a way that I felt was appropriate. I told the twins that their double chins were a bit embarrassing. I could see that they were taken aback, so I then turned to Gina and suggested that she might want to consider wearing a different top than a shrug over her bikini because her stomach was still visible, which made her look like a penguin. Gina's face turned red with embarrassment and she ran back to the hotel room. The twins started yelling at me, calling me sexist and saying how horrible it was for me to say such things about them. My father confronted me, clearly upset. He asked if I had really spoken to my stepmother and stepsisters in such a way. When I admitted it, he gave me a lecture about how he had raised me better and that I should never talk to a woman about her weight. I argued back that they were criticizing my weight and appearance, but my father made me apologize to Gina, who had locked herself in the bathroom crying after what I said. Gina and the twins made a big show of accepting my apology. Upon returning home, I informed my mother of the conversation I had had with my father. My mother expressed her concern about the situation and suggested that my father might have been partially responsible for it. She also indicated that she would consider contacting the authorities if Gina made any further comments about my weight or appearance. This prompted my father to reconsider his actions. Following this, Gina and the twins began to ignore me more frequently when my father was not present. However, I was not overly concerned about this, as I was already an independent teenager. When I turned 16, my mother was away for a few days, so I stayed with my father and Gina. I stayed with my dad and Gina. She mentioned that she was struggling with the extra cooking, so on my last night, I offered to help out by preparing dinner. I had learned to cook from my mom when I was young, so I felt confident in my ability to contribute. When I told Gina I was cooking, she invited some friends over. The meal was well received, and everyone complimented me. My dad offered to do the dishes, so I went to my room. From there, I heard Gina and her friends talking loudly. Outside my window, her friends were saying how lucky she was to have a nice husband and a great house. When they mentioned how nice it was that I cooked for them, Gina expressed her frustration at my presence. She said she found me annoying and that she couldn't stand seeing my face. She told her friends she couldn't wait until I was 18 so she wouldn't have to see me every weekend. When one of her friends mentioned again how nice I seemed, Gina admitted she had hoped I would fail at cooking so she could blame me for something. I was taken aback by this, as I was trying to be polite to her, despite knowing she disliked me. As time went on, Gina's feelings towards me only intensified during college, when I visited my dad for a few days at his insistence. She would often ignore me, scheduling family activities with just dad and the twins or with her and the twins, leaving me at home. If I happened to wake up late during my vacation, she would express her frustration by yelling at me, calling me names. Despite my best efforts to be respectful, I often felt that I was being viewed as lazy and inconsiderate. I knew I was always cleaning up after myself, but it seemed like nothing I did was ever enough. I also noticed that she was not always considerate of my privacy. She would sometimes enter my room while I was sleeping, waking me up or barging in without knocking, which made me feel extremely uncomfortable. She would also randomly search my room and look under my bed for reasons. I was unaware that she was reluctant to pick up dinner for me, but she was happy to do so for the family. Despite this, I tried to be respectful and spend time with my father whenever possible. Now, I would like to move on to the main incident. When I turned 21, my father invited me to visit him, saying he had some important news to share. It had been a while since I last visited, so I was a little apprehensive, but my mother encouraged me, saying it was good news. I agreed. Upon arrival, I booked my tickets. My dad greeted me warmly at the airport and we drove back to his place. I asked him about the news, but he said he would reveal everything during the family dinner when we arrived. I noticed the twins were home too. It had been a while since I had seen Emma and Emily. They didn't acknowledge my presence, and I didn't acknowledge theirs either. That night during dinner, my dad started by expressing how proud he was to have 3 wonderful children. He spoke about his gratitude for having such a loving family and shared some exciting news. The atmosphere was positive, and I felt a sense of anticipation as he continued speaking. He looked at each of us with a smile, including Gina, who had been giving me icy glares all day. My dad went on to say that he had recently lost a friend to a heart attack, which made him realize how lucky he was to have us. He had spoken to a lawyer and made a will upon hearing the word will. Gina and the twins became visibly excited. My father explained that he had decided to leave the house to my stepmother, as she was his wife. Gina beamed with pride and kissed him on the cheek. My father's house was a 5-bedroom property. If Gina ever decided to sell it, she could potentially make a significant profit. My father then announced that he was leaving his entire retirement account and his car to me. This wasn't just any car, it was a vintage vehicle that he had spent a considerable amount of time and money maintaining. A great deal of time and money had been spent maintaining the car, and it held sentimental value for both of us, as he often shared stories of his youth and adventures associated with it. As I processed this information, I came to understand that leaving the car to me was his way of expressing his love. My dad spoke about his pride in me inheriting the car, and Gina's expression shifted from pride to discontent. She exchanged glances with the twins, who seemed equally displeased. It was clear that the idea of me inheriting a significant sum of money and the beloved vintage car stoked their discontent. Money and the beloved vintage car stoked their resentment. Dad was apparently unaware of the tension in the room. He continued to explain how he would leave the joint bank account he shared with Gina to the twins since Gina was a homemaker. The money was entirely my dad's. He expressed his wish for the account to be equally divided between them. He assured them they would have money and a house to live in, so they needn't worry if anything happened to him. I thought this arrangement was fair. The twins expressed their disappointment, stating that they had expected more. They argued that my dad should also leave them his retirement account, claiming that I didn't need it anyway. When my dad questioned their reasoning, Gina chimed in, stating that as a guy, I should find my own way, whereas they were women and needed more money for financial security. My dad reminded Gina that he had already taken care of their college funds and that they were also getting a house and a bank account. Despite this, Gina continued to express her concerns. My father reiterated that his decision was final, and I observed as the discussion intensified. Gina suddenly became emotional, and my father reassured her that he had made an equitable distribution. Gina explained that she had kept silent for years to protect the family but was now unable to contain her feelings. The room fell into a tense silence. Silence fell between us as my dad and I exchanged confused looks, despite the palpable tension in the room. He gently encouraged Gina to share what was on her mind amidst her sobs. She began to recount how a few years ago, she had supposedly tried to force herself on me, but she had kept it hidden to protect me. I was taken aback by the unexpected accusation. Before I could even grasp what was happening, Gina started elaborating on her fabricated story. She told my dad that after our vacation in Greece, where we had an argument, I would often find myself staring at her and attempting to enter her bedroom uninvited. I sat frozen in my chair as she continued to recount tales of how I would try to barge in every time she took a shower or get uncomfortably close to her face when we were alone. She claimed she dreaded having me over every weekend because she feared I would behave the same way with the twins. I tried to defend myself, vehemently denying the baseless accusations. I was taken aback by her accusation and expressed my disbelief. I tried to defend myself, emphasizing that I had never behaved in such a way towards her. However, Gina continued to cry, maintaining that I had made her uncomfortable as I grew older. She also mentioned an incident when we were alone, which she felt was inappropriate. I was shocked and embarrassed to hear such a serious accusation. My father was clearly taken aback and concerned, looking between me and Gina, who seemed at a loss for words. Gina continued, her story claimed that she had suffered in silence for years, afraid to speak up for the sake of the family. I expressed my shock and disbelief at the accusation, insisting that there was no way I had ever looked at her inappropriately, let alone touched her. Gina yelled back that she was done keeping her silence and needed to expose a monster like me. The twins began shouting furiously at me, accusing me of putting their mother through this and using words like rapist and molester. I was taken aback by the intensity of the situation and the gravity of the accusations. It was a rather surprising turn of events. I had not anticipated that a pleasant evening would devolve into such a heated exchange of accusations. I sought my father's counsel, but he remained silent, evidently grappling with the situation. He inquired if Gina's statements were indeed true. She nodded and asserted that she would never lie to him about his son. She further added that, as his wife, he should believe her. I, on the other hand, was trying to defend myself. My father then asked Gina why she hadn't spoken up earlier. She explained that she had feared no one would believe her. I was a minor at the time, and I felt that my actions were inappropriate. As the stepmother who had married my dad, she felt people would dismiss her words. She claimed that she had to bear this silently to protect the family. I was crying at this point, begging my dad not to believe her. I had never imagined that Gina could fabricate such atrocious lies, especially after what she had put me through over the years. Unfortunately, Gina's manipulation had strained my relationship with my dad. He seemed torn between trusting me, and he was inclined to believe his wife. The twins, influenced by their mother's narrative, supported Gina's false accusations and yelled at me to leave their house. I replied that it was my dad's place and that they shouldn't believe their mother's lies. My dad, amidst the chaos, looked up at me and told me to leave the house until the matter was resolved. It was a difficult situation, being rejected by my own father, who chose to believe his second wife over me. I was hurt, confused, and betrayed. I gathered my belongings and left the home I had once considered to be my own. I flew straight to my mother, who was surprised to see me at her doorstep when I told her everything. She was upset and ready to confront my stepmom, but I asked her not to, knowing how unpredictable and dangerous Gina could be if she was upset about the inheritance and wanted to get me kicked out of my dad's house. She could do much more to ruin my life. I decided to cut off my dad permanently because I felt it was best for everyone involved. My dad chose to believe her, which I felt was unfair to me. My mom told me that my dad called her to express his shame in having a son like me and declared he wanted nothing to do with me. Despite her attempts to defend me, it was in vain. My dad's side of the family was also convinced by Gina's story and attacked my mom, accusing her of raising a pervert. I can't even begin to fathom the pain my mom felt hearing such words about her son. The damage was done, and Gina had won. I wish I could say my life improved after cutting her off, but it didn't. Gina and the twins continued bombarding me with vile text messages, threatening that I should stay away from my dad forever. It got so bad that I had to change my number to escape them. Even after that, things didn't get better. Gina's actions left me feeling uneasy about being around any woman, fearing I might be falsely accused again and lose my job and career. I was hesitant to meet anyone or go on dates throughout this ordeal. My mom was very supportive and believed me. I went through some challenging depressive and suicidal episodes, and my mom came to live with me for a couple of months to make sure I was doing okay. Gradually, my mental health improved, and I started to rebuild my life. Eventually, I met a wonderful woman named Mara. She brought joy back into my life. She has completely changed my life, and my mom adores her. Mara and my mom mean everything to me. Thanks to them, I continue to live my life with purpose. Just a week ago, I received a call from an unknown number, thinking it might be Amazon. I answered, to my shock, it was my dad. I was stunned to hear his voice. After nearly 7 years, he sounded old. When I asked how he got my new number, he dodged the question and asked if I told him I was fine and then asked him not to contact me again, as I had no desire to speak with him. That's when my dad broke down and started crying. He asked for my forgiveness and admitted how wrong he was to abandon his own son. I was curious, so I waited for him to explain. My dad then revealed that Gina had been cheating on him with his best friend for years. When he confronted her with proof, she stopped hiding and confessed that she was tired of being married to a pathetic man like him. My father discovered that Gina had only married him for his money and despised being with him. When he pressed her further, she confessed to fabricating all the accusations against me because she hated me and wanted all his wealth for herself and her daughters. My father divorced her, and she was not awarded any financial compensation from the marriage due to her affair. Despite her lawyers fighting for alimony, my father said he had been waiting to divorce Gina so he could officially reach out to me and apologize for what happened. He expressed his desire to make up for lost time and rebuild our father-son relationship. I told him that I did not consider him to be my father after how quickly he abandoned me for his wife's accusations. I told him that I wanted nothing to do with him and that he should stop contacting me. I ended the call and hoped he got the message. Since then, I've been inundated with calls from my father and his side of the family, with whom I have not had contact for some time, have been in touch to express their sadness at my refusal to communicate with my father following his decision to cut off contact due to Gina's false accusations. I am aware that my stance may be seen as unkind, but I believe it is important to stand up for myself and my feelings. I have now shared my thoughts on the matter on my social media page, and I hope that my message is now visible to all. To those who offered support and advice, I am truly grateful. Your words helped me gain a new perspective. While I am upset with my father for believing my stepmother over me, I am also frustrated with the way she treated me for so many years. I was just a child, and she used her influence to blackmail and manipulate me, while I remained silent. I believe it is time for me to open up to my mother and share my experiences with her, as I know she will understand. Update 2. Hello everyone. I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to provide an update on my mental health, which I'm happy to say is doing well. I'm grateful for your kind words of support. I booked tickets for my mom to come visit me so I could tell her and Mara everything. They already sensed something was up. I started by telling them about Dad's contact after all these years, which shocked my mom. She asked why he reached out, and I explained. She had no idea he had gone through a divorce and was furious at Gina, for I then informed them of how, at the tender age of 12, I had been subjected to manipulation by Gina. I also recounted how she had bullied me when my father was absent and had even threatened to divorce him if I ever told him. It was only when I began to open up about these events, one by one, that I began to realize how traumatic they had been. By the time I had finished, I was in tears. Mara and my mother were also crying quietly. My mother immediately hugged me, repeatedly. She said that I shouldn't have kept this all in and that it was okay to share. I cried for half an hour while my mom held me. Mara also told me that no child should have gone through what I did. She said that it was completely fine if I chose never to speak to my dad again, since he should have protected me. My mom nodded, saying that I had no obligations to explain anything to my dad. She said that when I needed him the most, he chose to believe his wife over me. The only reason I came to understand that perhaps my father had never truly loved me because he would never have believed I was capable of such things. After sharing my past with Gina, my mother, and Mara, I felt a great deal of relief. I have since blocked my father and will continue to do so if he attempts to contact me. I do not owe any explanations to those who chose to abandon me. I'd like to provide an update on my situation. It's been 6 months since I wrote this post, and I'm amazed at how much my life has changed. I'd like to start by sharing some happy news. I proposed to Mara, and she said yes. My mom is thrilled for us, and we're considering moving closer to her because the schools are better there. Since both of us can work from anywhere, it makes sense for our future family. Thanks to advice from people on Reddit, I've also started therapy. I'm grateful for the support I've received from my mother and Mara. They've been a source of stability and encouragement throughout my journey. While the past has presented challenges, I'm optimistic about a future free from the negativity and drama. Thank you for your interest in my story. If you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe and stay updated on the latest real-life experiences.